Teen climate activist Greta Thunberg arrived in New York Harbor Wednesday, ending her 2-week trek across the Atlantic.
It's strange, everyone always asks me about Donald Trump. But, I mean, my message for him is just listen to the science, and he obviously doesn't do that.
According to the IPCC, we are less than 12 years away from not being able to undo our mistakes. Adults keep saying, we owe it to the young people to give them hope. But I don't want your hope. I don't want you to be hopeful. I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day. And then I want you to act. I want you to act as if you would in a crisis. I want you to act as if the house was on fire. Because it is.
Hello, friends. God bless you. Good to be with you today. I'm Gery Wagoner from Ohio. I live in North America. And today we're going to be talking about an issue that all of us have heard about. And that issue is climate change. And the title of this presentation is Climate Change or Climate Religion. Interesting title, right? I am a commercial roofing contractor by trade. My wife and I also have a counseling ministry where we try to encourage people around the world in their marriages and in their personal lives. My business has brought me into close contact with climate-related issues, and that's why we're talking about this topic today, specifically the topic of climate change. Okay. In Genesis chapter 1, we see that the earth has been blessed by God in a unique way, a very special way. During that creation narrative, as I go through the slides, God says in Genesis 1, verse 26, for instance, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the fowl of the air and over the cattle and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that moves upon the earth. That's verse 26. Now, verse 27. And so God made man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Notice the distinction there. Notice also the distinction between creator and creation. A valuable distinction as we build a biblical worldview here. Verse 28, and God blessed them. We like that word. We like to be blessed. We want a blessing. We want to bless others. God blessed them, and he said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. In other words, have children, as many as you like. And subdue the earth and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the earth. That's everything, isn't it? Now, I'll go on to another slide here. When I was a boy, 1974, I entered in the science fair in our school here in Ohio. I was keenly interested in astronomy at the time, which has to do with the universe, the planets, the stars, the sun, all of that, the cosmos, so to speak. And so I entered the science fair with an exhibit in 1974, and I ended up winning the science fair. Out of all the people that they could have chosen, they chose my project and my presentation. So as a result of that, I was scheduled to enter the state championships in Ohio, the science fair championships. I got ready for that championship, and just before the date came, something unusual happened. A large F5 tornado, which is the biggest tornado you can have, went through central Ohio, the town of Xenia, and Central State University College, destroyed the university where the championships were going to be held. In the wake of that serious state disaster, the science fair championship was canceled. So it didn't happen. I was disappointed. More than that, I was disappointed for the destruction that the tornado caused. Ever since that time, I was 14 years of age. It's easy to remember my age. I was born in 1960, and so when I was in 1974, I was 14. It's pretty simple. But as I got older over the years, I took a cursory interest in astronomy and climate issues, and I eventually started a business to put on roofing and do special polyurethane foam insulation. That was to give people control over the climates of their home. That's what we do. I've been at it since 1984. But what we're talking about now is not the climate inside our home. It is the climate inside of this biosphere, inside the Earth's atmosphere. What's happening here? Well, in 1977, we were told that the Earth was entering a cooling period, global cooling. You can find that in almost all of the large magazines in America during that period of time from 1974 to 1977. Repeatedly, we were told that we were entering a global cooling period. In fact, Time magazine referred to it as a mini ice age. A new ice age was coming. Well, if that's true, we better chop a lot of wood and get ready for it, right? Well, 77 moved on. We moved into the 1980s. The 1980s was kind of what we call a normal period of time, and then we moved into the 1990s. In the 1990s, we were told that there was a global warming trend that was happening. And by the way, the solution for it was massive government control over your life and mine. That was their answer. Okay. And then we entered a period of 1998 to 2013. And during that period of time, to the dismay of some of the climate zealots, Al Gore, individuals like that, there was a pause, a cooling trend, or at least a stationary trend where no cooling was happening. That was about 16 years. And these individuals who were eagerly wanting the government to assume more and more control over our private lives were troubled, because we had this static period of time now where there was essentially no warming. They couldn't claim global warming was happening when there wasn't any, or at least very, very little. And so as we entered into the 2000s, this millennium, they came up with a new term. You've heard that term. Climate change, right? Right. Now, climate change is the perfect term for individuals who would like to gain greater amounts of control over your life and mine. Why? Because the climate is always changing. It's perfect. And once more, the solution was massive government control over our lives. Then, as we moved into the last decade and a half, climate change began to take on an observable religious tone. And I, like many other people, observed that, and I began looking into it. For instance, we began to hear about carbon credits. Carbon credits were needed to help offset intrusion that human beings were causing upon the earth. Now, That's not in line with the scriptures that we just read in Genesis chapter 1, is it? No. No. Mankind, humanity, was the crowning capstone of creation. And we were put here to have dominion over the earth, to fill it with people, to take care of it, and to enjoy it. But climate change began to take on an observable religious tone. For instance, carbon credits were suggested as a way to undo some of the damage that human beings were doing. The most zealous of these religious climate change individuals began to see humans as an intruder on the earth. Well, again, that's not according to the biblical narrative. Let me give you an example. Believing in a carbon credit that would produce a better climate has almost as much scientific basis as the pagan rite of human sacrifice to ensure a good harvest. Let me go on to the next slide here. So climate fervor is the fastest growing religion in the world. Wait a minute, you say, what about Islam? Yes, Islam is growing rather rapidly. But climate fervor is even integrating into Islam. It's the fastest growing religion in the world. And I realize I need to be able to support that statement, not just to make it and not support it. Mother Earth began to be regarded as an inert object, or it was regarded as an inert object over the past. Particularly through the industrial era, we regarded Mother Earth as an inert object to be used, to be taken care of. But that view began to change. Today, Mother Earth is regarded as worthy of some sort of destiny or deity, worthy of our worship. That's quite different, isn't it, from regarding the earth as an inert object, as creation tells us. Now let's go on here. And so we began to see a new green religion spring up around us, and it had so many tentacles into every element of society, into your life and mine. On a micro level, little things were done to change the way you and I live our lives. Well, that's okay. But climate change began to take on another aspect, that there was oncoming judgment. That if we didn't take care of what they called global and then climate change, if we didn't somehow fix this, that there would be a judgment and you and I would be held guilty. The new green religion has its own prophecy. There were many, many prophecies that were given. For instance, Al Gore said that certain areas of the coastal United States would be inundated with water in a short period of time, right around 2004. That didn't happen, did it? And so many of those prophecies were failed. I don't have time to go into all of them. But in keeping with a religion, this new green religion offered salvation. Now our ears perk up. Salvation. Is that talking about Jesus? No, that's talking about saving the planet, and in the process, saving ourselves. There was an element of sin introduced into this new green religion. Driving an SUV, a diesel pickup truck, were considered sin. Then there was forgiveness. If you would plant a tree, if you would carbon credit, you could have forgiveness for your sins. Let's go on. And so there began to be this new element of morality introduced into this climate change discussion. Morality. And you would see the Pope step into that vacuum of morality and declare that climate change was now a moral issue, and he was here to help guide us through this worldwide catastrophe. There were saints in this new green religion. There are saints, the founder of the Audubon Society, Paul Ehrlich, for instance, Saint Francis of Assisi, whom the current Pope has named himself after. And there was also prayer, and there were holy writings. I'll get into more of that later. And so you can see this new green religion has almost every element of religion and religious fervor. And there was outreach. You had to reach out to people around you and help convince them that they needed to do something to change the climate, to fix the climate, to heal the earth. And lastly, there's evangelism, which is the end result of outreach. It's mass evangelism, and you'll see that as we go on. Okay, now having said all that, let's go into the presentation here. Next slide. I'd like to speak about the United Nations Earth Charter Summit. Now that happened some years ago in Cancun, Mexico. And something very interesting happened here that began to reveal to, yes, there was a strong religious element to this climate discussion. What happened? Well, that meeting began with a call to the gods. Now, a Christian would refer to that as prayer, right? You can read about this in the Washington Post. Who was praying and what were they praying to? Who were they praying to? Well, Christiana Figueres, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, to, get this, the ancient jaguar goddess Ictal, in her opening statement to all the delegates gathered in Cancun, Mexico, November 29th, 2010. She noted that this goddess was not only a goddess of the moon, but a goddess of reason, creativity, and weaving. May she inspire you with her prayer, because today we're gathered here to weave together the elements of a response to climate change, unquote. Okay, there's a picture of Christiana. I've never met her. Those who have said she has a very harsh personality. I don't know if that's true or not. Let's go on here. In that meeting, they developed something very significant called the Earth Charter document. I don't have time to go into every aspect of the Earth Charter document, but a few generalizations regarding it, I believe, could be helpful. The Earth Charter document is, in essence, a replacement Bible or a replacement 10 Commandments. Why do I say that? Well, number one, it was an international treaty for building a just, sustainable, and global society. Again, we are talking about the Earth Charter document. That document still exists, by the way, and I will reveal to you where that is currently. I think you'll be amazed. Throughout the document, they talked about global interdependence. This was a code language for a socialist collective where individual rights were diminished and the power of the state is elevated to have control over your life and mine. Okay. Now, this particular document was endorsed by over 4,500 organizations from around the world, almost 5,000, and many, many governments, almost all of them. There's over 190 governments in the world. Nearly every one of them endorsed this document. The document was currently soft law. In other words, it wasn't legally binding, but it was morally binding for states that adopted it. Okay, and the same could be said for the 2015 Paris climate deal that we'll get later. The Earth Charter document forms the basis for the development of hard law. In other words, to make it legally binding on every citizen of the earth. Okay, well, what's in this document? We'll take a look here. It calls on all people to embrace a new global ethic. Okay, a new global ethic, a new paradigm shift. That document, by the way, was translated into 58 languages. Must be pretty important. It mentions the word sustainable 28 times. It mentions the word human 26 times. It mentions the term earth over 20 times, life 26 times. It mentions the word environment 28 times and social times. But conspicuously missing from this document was any reference to God. Where is this document now? If it is indeed a replacement counterfeit of the Bible and the 10 Commandments that God gave humanity, where is it now? It is inside of what they call the Ark of Hope. And I have some pictures that will help you understand what that's all about. It's been placed in the Ark of Hope. The Ark of Hope was created out of a special tree, I believe from Germany, as a special place of refuge for the Earth Charter document. Okay, it was handcrafted. Inside this ark, there are almost 1,000 handcrafted books of prayers. These are spiritualistic prayers. Occult is a better term for them if you get right down to it. But inside this Ark of Hope are almost 1,000 of these handcrafted prayer books. There are also images, sacred images, sacred to people who are into progressive spirituality. Now, these books have a name. They are called the Timonaz books. As I mentioned earlier, this Ark of Hope was handcrafted from a single piece of sycamore maple that was harvested from a sustainable forest in Germany. Now, the Earth Charter document itself was handwritten on special paper. Is this starting to sound a little familiar to you? It was handwritten on special papyrus. According to the arkofhope.org, page 1, it says that the carrying poles are unicorn horns, which render evil ineffective. In other words, they're a good luck charm. Now, I don't know where you buy unicorn poles. Home Depot doesn't have them, but that's what it says. Now, the ark was transported by a special group of people. It was carried on a pilgrimage for 350 miles through 4 states. Ultimately, it was brought by boat, a boat that had been owned by Pete Seeger years and years ago, an old singer, American singer. They bought that boat and they put the ark on the boat and they brought it into the New York harbor with quite a bit of fanfare. The ark was borne along on the backs of women, only women. Okay. Today, that ark has visited many, many countries. It's been to South Africa, India, Amsterdam, many, many other countries. Now, I have some pictures of the Ark of Hope. Hopefully, they will be useful to you. There they are. Do you notice any similarities there? Lower left-hand corner, you can see the women who are carrying the Ark of Hope. There are no men involved in carrying it. There are some men who support it and followed along, but none of them were allowed to carry it. In other words, these women are priestesses. Remember, the real ark, the Ark of the Covenant, only a priest was allowed to touch it, right? Notice the similarity. Notice some of these other pictures. Notice the people on the right-hand side of the screen that are giving offerings to this ark. It's sitting there on a pedestal. And there's a picture of a large group of people standing around the ark in a prayer circle, praying over it. This is a full-scale alternative to the gospel of the Bible, dear friends. Now, I'll read you something here. Going to the next slide. The Ark of Hope, and this is a quote, I quote, "The Ark of Hope, comma, carrying the vision of the Earth Charter belongs to Earth and humankind. Its life grows when it is shared. So there's a strong spiritual element. It is hoped that nations around the world will bring the Ark to their people, continuing to introduce the Earth Charter to audiences globally, spreading hope and the recognition of the interdependence of justice, that is code word for social justice, by the way, and economic and ecological, which is environmental integrity. For what purpose? To together build a culture of peace. Okay, peace sounds good. I like peace. So let's go on to the next slide. You see the picture there of a group of people standing around this Ark of Hope, chanting and praying over it. You'll notice the size of that ark is very similar to what we know about the Ark of the Covenant. That's not a coincidence, by the way. And that leads us to the next point, which is on the next slide, that saving the planet has become more important than saving souls. You see, the God who gave us the Ark of the Covenant, the real Ark, was interested in saving people. And he told that to Abraham, Abraham, in thee shall all nations of the earth be blessed. But we've entered a time where saving the planet now is more important than saving souls. Saving the planet has replaced the story of redemption as the ultimate fulfillment of human expression. That's pretty powerful religion, isn't it? Question I have for you, is it true religion or is it false religion? I'll let you decide. Christians, Seventh-day Adventists, and people around the world are being pressured to add environmentalism to their Christian worldview. Are you a believer? You are under pressure to add environmentalism to your current worldview. Okay. And a big part of that worldview is that we must save the world, and in the process, we save ourselves. Let's go on. Now, I mentioned green outreach earlier. Here are some details of what I meant by that. In 1993, an organization was formed. It was called the National Religious Partnership for the Environment. Okay. Notice some key words there. National, that restricts it to America. Religious, that applies it to anyone who's religious. Partnership implies a collective. Okay, 1993. They were given a gift of $16 million in 1999. That's a lot of money. What do you suppose they would do with that? Their mission was to get churches across America to, quote unquote, green their messages. In other words, to incorporate environmentalism into sermons, into Sunday and Sabbath school programs, into Bible studies, to bring environmentalism into this area of Christianity. Well, $16 million is a lot of money. 10 years later, they received another $650,000 from the Rockefeller Brothers Fund here in America. So they're not hurting for money. They also received $475,000, almost $500,000, in 2006 from the Hewlett Foundation. Well, I can go into that more some other time, but if you want to look up the Hewlett Foundation, I believe that will be enlightening for you. So as a result, green theologians are now reinterpreting the Bible in environmental ways. They've even came up with a green Bible. Have you seen that? An environmentalist Bible. By the way, something I need to touch on here. Climate change is a dream come true for people who desire global control over the world, friends. It's a dream come true. Why? Because it affects every aspect of your life. Now, here's something else interesting, and I believe worth noting, and that is that the heads of the environmental organizations around the world almost all of them tend to agree that we have too many people on the earth. Okay, if there's too many, then what, according to them, would be the right amount? They almost all agree that the optimum amount of people on the earth, on the globe, on our planet would be 300 to 500 million people. Okay. In other words, we have to get rid of 91 to 94% of all the people on the earth currently. Wow. That is some religious fervor worth paying attention to. Let's go on here to the scientific aspect. I won't spend a lot of time on this. I mentioned in the 1970s it was a time of global cooling, and that was because we were experiencing what's known in astronomical circles as a a solar minimum. We were experiencing a solar minimum. All that means is that there was less sunspot activity on the sun, which in turn reduced the electromagnetic energy that the Earth receives from the sun fractionally. Okay. And then the 1990s, of course, the big cry was global warming. 2000s, the cry was climate change. And the solution in every case is the same, and that is massive government control over our lives. Now, in the Bible, we notice something rather interesting. The Bible says that men's hearts would fail them for fear. In other words, there would be a lot of fear in the last days. You'll find that in Luke chapter 21, verse 26. In all of these global cooling, global warming, climate change, and by the way, they've come full circle, and now they are back saying that we are headed for a solar minimum, which will lead to a small ice age again. If you're like me, sometimes you wish they would make up their minds. But inherent in each of these worldviews is the high octane fuel of what? Fear. Fear. Men's hearts shall fail them for fear. Now let's go on to the next slide, and we have a satellite temperature of the lower atmosphere. And here you can see from 1979 to late 2018, last fall, readings of the satellite temperatures of the lower atmosphere. This comes from Dr. Roy Spencer, who is a friend of mine. I rely on Roy for technical information. He's a very fair individual. He is fully referred to in some circles as a climate denier. No, he's a good scientist. He used to work for NASA, a very, very careful scientist. He was interviewed yesterday on Fox News talking about Hurricane Dorian. And he had some very interesting things to say about that, how there were more hurricanes prior to 1950 than there have been since 1950. So if you can see this satellite temperature graph here, you can see that, yes, there is a modicum of warming. Yeah, there has been some, sure. The question then is, where does that warming come from? Is it from human activity, or is it a result of sunspotting going on the sun, solar activity? I'll leave that there, and we'll keep going into the biblical worldview here of climate change. The next slide here is an average global temperature between 1875 and 2019. Some scientists at NASA took all the temperature readings that we had available from 1875, which was just shortly after the Civil War in America, up to today. And they put it on a chart. Notice the chart here. It's pretty stable, really. You know, there's slight variations and fluctuations, but it's pretty stable. It certainly takes away a little bit of the fear that some of these climate alarmists have been able to instill into your life and mine. But let's go on here. We want to be fair. The next slide shows the year and the decade of the highest United States temperatures. And I realize the United States is only a small part of the actual landmass of the Earth, but our temperature records are worth taking a look at. And quite a number of them were set back in 1936. Must have been a hot year, right? 1917, 1898 in California, 1913 was their hottest state temperature. The state of Maine, 1911 was their highest. Florida, 1931. Ohio, where I live, 1934. Now there is one recent one here, and that is South Carolina. Their record was set in 2012. Let's go on here. Now, there's a political aspect to this, and that's why it's being pushed with so much energy. Because as Time magazine said 4 years ago, there is big money, huge money to be made in the environmental game. There's huge money to be made in the climate change business. And there are people making money on it. I won't go into that. But I will go into this aspect, and that is if you can gain geopolitical control of climate management, then you can control every person on the earth. I mean, every person. They can determine whether you even drive a car, and if you drive a car, where you drive it, how far, how often, and where you can go. That's huge. Okay. Now, the climate change movement has often been ideologically tied to the socialist movement, and I believe that is accurate. There's a reason for that. There is a strong socialist aspect, not only in the Earth Charter document, which is actually the religious Magna Carta for the climate change religion, but they see capitalism, in other words, the free market, as an enemy of Mother Nature. Now, the free market has a lot of good things to offer. Is it perfect? No. Certainly communism is not perfect with all of the hundreds of millions that they've killed over the years. Socialism is not perfect either. Capitalism is, I believe, the best that we have. It operates on the premise of a free market, which essentially is that if you have something to sell or you want to buy something, no one points a gun at your head and says where you have to buy it or where you have to sell it. You can enter into the free exchange of goods and services. Now, I'd like to share with you on the next slide, or the same slide, but the next image of a climate disaster prediction from the United Nations. They predicted a significant disaster by the year 2000 if global warming was not checked. Well, that was in 1989. They predicted coastal flooding. They predicted you would be chased out of your homes wherever you lived if you were near the coastline of one of these countries of ours. That would create a huge environmental refugee crisis by the year 2000. Didn't happen. It's another one of those failed climate prophecies. Now, let's move to a more important aspect of the green religion, and that is Pope Francis. On the next slide, we will deal with some of his interventions into the climate debate. He's a smart guy. Okay. Yeah. He's a Jesuit-trained individual. These are usually pretty smart people. They know how to see an opportunity and they know how to take advantage of it. He has jumped on the global warming bandwagon almost immediately. And it's funny, I was walking through the mall in Piqua the night that he was elected as the new Pope. And I texted a friend of mine who is a climate scientist as well as Roy Spencer. It wasn't Roy, it was someone else. And I said, could it be that this new Pope will champion environmentalism? Because that's where it was heading. He said, I don't know, but we'll be watching. Boy, it didn't take long to find out. You better believe he jumped right up on the global warming bandwagon, grabbed the reins, and is in complete control of it. In the year 2015, Pope Francis released a papal encyclical on what? On the environment. Okay, that was 2015. He also came to America that year and actually spoke to Congress here in America. I had a couple of friends who were in the audience. Now, his encyclical of 2015 was a call for action on climate change. Positioning himself to be the moral authority on this issue, he was now saying the moral thing to do is for you to get on board of the climate change agenda, surrender various freedoms that you hold in favor of saving the planet. Okay. There's a couple of pictures of him there. He doesn't look real happy. Other pictures, he looks cheerful. I have a friend who's actually related to him. She's a cousin of this individual. She doesn't know him real well, but she does remember him at family reunions when he was a cardinal. She said her mother knew him a lot better than she did. Interesting, isn't it? I would like to quote you some particular quotes from the papal encyclical, Laudato Si. The Pope's papal encyclical. I read the whole thing. I marked it up. It was over 200 pages, close to 300. Quote number 1, praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth. Stop. Wait a minute. You see, now Mother Earth is being invested with an element of humanity. You see that there? Let's go on. Who sustains us and governs us, governed by the planet? Well, the Bible tells us we are to be governed by God. In fact, the call that went to Abraham and through Abraham was to call forth people who individually choose to be governed by God. The Pope here is suggesting now that we are governed by the earth, by the inanimate object of the earth. Continuing on, and who produces various fruit with colored flowers and herbs. That's on page 1, right at the very beginning. Okay, let's go on to page 171. Joined to the incarnate Son present in the Eucharist. You know what the Eucharist is. If you don't, that is the wafer used in the Catholic Mass, the Roman Catholic Mass. The whole cosmos gives thanks to God. In other words, these inanimate objects are now capable of praising God. You might say, well, that runs pretty close to some expressions in the Psalms where it talks about the stars singing, trees of the field clapping their hands. I understand that, but that's not where the Pope is coming from, and it's not where he's headed. You see, let's go on to page 167. Quote, the world which came forth from God's hands returns to him in blessed and undivided adoration. In the bread of the Eucharist, creation is projected towards divinization, towards the holy wedding feast, towards unification with the Creator himself. What does that mean? He is uniting the Mass, the Roman Catholic Mass, the ceremony of the Mass, divinization, which it already has been years and years ago. It was one of the reasons that brought about the Reformation in the 1500s. And now he's bringing creation into this in a rather subtle and yet brilliant way to help gain your moral support. Let's go on. Page 231. On Sunday, well, that's interesting. He's picked out a day here. On Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist, or the Roman Catholic Mass, has a special importance. And so the day of rest, centered on the Eucharist, the Mass, it sheds light on the whole week and motivates us to a greater concern for nature. Oh, and the poor. Environmentalism and social justice, page 237. By the way, two powerful forces in our world driving spirituality today. Two powerful forces behind spirituality today. They are inter-spiritual mysticism and social justice ideology. To put it another way, spiritual experience and social justice ideology. Mysticism and social justice ideology. If you haven't seen those two showing up in your world, friends, then your eyes aren't open. Let's go on. Jesus, I'm quoting now from Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical, Jesus united himself to the earth when he was formed in the womb of Mary. No, he united himself to humanity, to be called the Son of Man from that point on. Lastly, Mary, of all creation, completely transfigured, she now lives with Jesus, and all creatures sing of her fairness. Okay, all of that comes from Laudato Si, the 2015 papal encyclical on the environment. Can you see how the Pope is using the climate change and the environmentalist agenda to gain moral control over people and unite them under the banner of environmentalism? Now, some of you are probably asking at this point, well, Mr. Wagoner, what about the environment? Shouldn't we care for it? We should exercise a wide stewardship over the earth. We should enhance its beauty, its safety, its productivity. Absolutely. But we should never, ever, ever make a religion out of it, because that was what the pagans have done down through Bible history. They worship the earth. Do you think it's a coincidence that throughout the Bible you will find the term they worshiped under every green tree over and over again? Okay, let's go back now to the next slide. Pope Francis and the Catholic Church. He is calling for an ecological conversion. In other words, a biblical change of heart towards the environment, towards environmentalism. He did that on March 8th of this year in Vatican's Clementine Hall. In 2016, a couple of years ago in September, he very plainly said global warming is a sin. Okay, in other words, you're guilty of something and you need to make atonement for that. You need to go through him to find that atonement. Okay. Also in 2016, he said we should work together to become artisans of peace and social justice. May 19th, 2016. By the way, this Pope is a huge advocate of social justice, and I don't have time today to go into the aspects of social justice. Suffice it to say that this is a huge, powerful movement, by the way, which global warming is aligned under. Okay, global warming is actually a subtext under social justice. There are quite a number of subtexts of social justice that are driving. There's sexual justice, gender justice, racial justice, economic justice, eco-justice, which is radical environmentalism. Gender justice, by the way, is the adoption and advocation of homosexual rights. You'll find that all under social justice. Now let's go on to December of 2016. Catholic priests are now expected to preach global warming, and that was on the Catholic Online website. And it wasn't just put out there on the website. This was a decree that went out to all the 14,000. I know there's about 14,000 Jesuit priests in the world. I don't know how many Roman Catholic priests there are, but this went out to every one of them. They were now expected to preach global warming. Okay. Not expected to preach from the Bible, but rather to preach this social justice agenda. 2017, climate deniers are literally killing us, and murder is murder, and we should punish it as such. So what that is saying is, if you don't believe that mankind is having an impact on the climate, that other factors are, other astronomical factors like solar maximums, you could be guilty of murder. As a murderer, you would need to be tried for your crime and then appropriately punished. And so we have these social justice narratives being pushed by the Pope all around the world. The next slide, we talk about world forces aligning. And this will surprise you probably like it did me when I discovered that Islam is coming on board with this climate change bandwagon. That really surprised me. Until I began reading the Quran. And I found there statements that says all the earth is a mosque. Ah, what is a mosque? A mosque is sacred ground. Therefore, the earth is sacred ground. The Catholic Church is on board. If you unite Islam, if you unite them with the Catholic Church, if you unite them or add to the mix evangelical Christians around the world, you have a very powerful force. And you throw in the secular world, which is almost entirely on board with this agenda. You throw in the United Nations. The United Nations is one of the tools that is using to help bring this about, friends. It has been said by people who've been there that the United Nations is 1 part incompetent and 3 parts corrupt. I think that's accurate from everything that I've read about it. And if you want to read something blow your mind, go read about the Lucius Trust. You can find that on Wikipedia right there in plain sight under the United Nations. That's actually an occult group. It was the spiritual advisor for many people at the United Nations for years, and they still have a room themselves in the United Nations building to spiritually advise members of the UN. Let's go on here. Students and academia are coming on board. We have Greta Thunberg, for instance, from Sweden, whom you've probably heard of by now, who is helping to organize a large children's activist protest in favor of the climate. She's jumped on board of this bandwagon as well. She's gotten all kinds of exposure from various media outlets. She just recently came to America. Last week, she arrived on a sustainable craft. Took her a long time because she wasn't willing to use diesel fuel for an engine. Apparently, they made it, and she was greeted by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the Corybantic American Congresswoman, who is also the author of what we call the New Green Deal. These two are, along with the Pope, the United Nations, with Green Islam, are ideological counterparts of this huge, massive religion that's growing and gathering in our world, friends. Okay. Now here's you'll notice on the right-hand side of the screen, a little image that says, "Save the planet, kill yourself." That was actually taken from an environmentalist march some years ago. The woman was carrying that sign. I would guess, based on that image, he agrees that there are too many people on the planet. By the way, that's why the United Nations is in favor of abortion. You read that in some of their directives. They support it. And that's why abortion is a subtext of social justice. Really? Yeah, it's called reproductive justice. Look for it. Let's go on now to Islam and radical environmentalism. A good Muslim is an eco-Muslim. This was an image that was made recently. A globalized eco-Islam a survey in 2012. There was an imam that wrote a book called Green Deen, What Islam Teaches About Protecting the Planet. Muslims and Catholics United for Justice. Muslims support liberty and social justice. It's growing amongst all peoples, friends. Okay, now Revelation 11:18. At this point, some people are saying, well, Mr. Wagoner, doesn't Revelation 11:18 tell us that God will destroy people who destroy the earth? Yeah, it does say that. What does it mean? Using the Bible to interpret itself, let's take a look at that passage. This is a passage that is often used by well-meaning Christians, many times Adventists, I've encountered some of them, to try and claim that we need to have an environmentalist worldview in the church. They use this to justify environmentalism. Now, let's take a look at Revelation 11:18, where it says God will destroy them who destroy the earth. The word there for destroy is a word that also means corrupt. God will corrupt them who corrupt the earth. Now, this passage, letting the Bible interpret itself, is linked to several other places in the Bible, primarily Genesis chapter 6, where it says, God looked upon the earth. This was prior to the flood, and he saw that the entire earth was what? Corrupted with violence. And he said, I will destroy every living thing off the face of the earth. Fortunately, he found a family who believed in him, and he saved that family, and through that family repopulated the earth. But there's another link to Revelation chapter 11, verse 18. I will destroy them who destroy the earth. You can find that in Revelation chapter 19, verse 2. And here it's talking about the judgment on the great harlot. And you find there in that passage that the 24 elders there in heaven are praising God because he has destroyed, he finally had enough, and he destroyed the great harlot. Well, who's the great harlot? Well, you'll find a lot of indicators in the Bible about who that is, particularly Revelation chapter 17 goes into the identity of the great harlot. Its premier city sits on 7 hills. Its primary colors are red and scarlet. It is drunk with the blood of saints and martyrs. It's a worldwide organization. And it teaches people to commit spiritual porneia, or pornography, fornication. Back to Revelation chapter 19, verse 2. The elders, the 24 elders, are saying, praise God, for you have judged the great harlot, which didst corrupt the earth with violence and fornication. Okay. So don't let people take Revelation 11, dear ones, and convince you that you need to join this new green religion or have an environmentalist worldview in addition to your biblical worldview. Just go with them to other parts of the Bible. Psalms, for instance, says, the earth, the whole earth belongs to God. Or no, creation belongs to the Lord, but the earth he has committed to the children of men. You'll never see that verse quoted in people who quote Revelation 11:18 and other passages of the Bible. Okay, let's go on here. I sum up what I'm saying here in Revelation 11:18 in this way. God is much more concerned about the new earth than he is about the old one, friends. There are beautiful places on the earth. I've been to Gerenga Fjord. I've been to Pulpit Rock in Stavanger. I've been to the Painted Desert in America. I've been to Arches National Park in Moab, Utah. I've been to some beautiful places on the earth, friend, but this earth is temporary. Its days are numbered. It is going to be destroyed by God himself to make a new one. We want to be there. And we will be there if we don't yield to false counterfeits of genuine Christianity, like this new green religion. You see, God is much more concerned about humans than he is about limestone, about sycamore trees and Tasmanian fruit bats. God cares about people primarily. Now, take care of the earth. Don't dump your dirty motor oil down your kitchen sink or in the creek. Take care of it. But be real, be balanced, and never, ever, ever worship the earth. Now, let's go on the next slide to Romans chapter 1. You will find that Romans chapter 1 is an incredible theological analysis of our current cultural paradigm. And Romans talks about these issues, friends. As Adventists, you and I love Revelation chapter 12, Revelation chapter 14, and the whole Bible. And I have come in the last few years to have a great appreciation for Romans chapter 1 as well. Romans chapter 1 tells us a number of things. Number one, it tells us that we are in the middle of a worldwide revival. Oh, that's good, you say. No, it isn't good. It's a pagan revival with pagan impulses and a pagan culture. Romans chapter 1 verse 25 says, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worshiped and served the created things rather than the Creator, who is praised forever. There's the problem. There is a tendency in all people, apart from the uplifting truth of God and Jesus Christ, there is a tendency to worship natural things. The atheists worship that. I worship myself. You're a created thing. You're part of creation. The philosophical approval of homosexuality, for instance, I'm just throwing this out, is intrinsically religious. You'll also find that here in Romans chapter 1. Climate change Sunday, that's been mentioned. As Seventh-day Adventist, our premier expectation prophetically is that eventually all people will be compelled to observe Sunday in place of God's true Sabbath day. The Sabbath day is in the Ten Commandments, right? We take that pretty seriously, as we should. There is a green Sabbath movement going on right now, friends. We have written a number of articles on it. You can find them on various websites. One of them that comes to mind is fulcrum7.com. If you look for an article there titled How Green Thou Art, it goes into some of these aspects with more detail, more than I have time to go into now. There is a green Sabbath movement. Okay, well, Sabbath sounds good, right? That's part of the Ten Commandments, but what do they mean by it? They mean Sunday. Really? Yeah, absolutely. The Salvation Army Church came out recently and a huge initiative claiming that we need to have a green Sabbath. There's a church in London, England that's claiming that and has a following now. There's also a movement called the Slow Sunday movement, and that is to start reducing your activity on Sunday. Why? Why would you need a green Sabbath? Why would you need a slow Sunday? To allow the earth to heal. That's the excuse being given, by the way, and it's a false reason. Now let's go on here. All of these things are ideas currently. They're not hard law. They're just ideas, but they're growing in rapid form. The Pope is making all kinds of suggestions about these things. Actually, he's going to come right out and saving time. My guess is within the next 18 months, we will see the Pope come right out and say, all right, guys, you need to start keeping the day to let the earth heal. He's already said that in different ways in his encyclical. I look for him to boil that all down into a definitive statement. And maybe he will associate that with some sort of natural disaster, and everyone's going to perk up. He'll get their attention. So what should we do, you and I, as we occupy until Jesus comes, as we look for that new earth and that new city, a better earth and a better city? What should we do? Well, number one, resist this green dragon, friends. Don't get caught up in this deceptive green religion. The pitfalls are all around you. Focus on the Word of God. Stay focused on the Bible. Maintain your hope in the earth to come. Maintain your hope in the city to come, Jerusalem, of which we are citizens, if we are part of the kingdom of God and followers of Jesus. And what does that mean in a practical way? Well, don't abuse the earth, friends, just to push back on this stuff. Don't say, okay, well, I'm going to fight against this green religion. I'm going to start throwing my dirty motor oil or polymeric isocyanate into the creek or the fence row or whatever. Don't do that. Be a good steward, be wise, but be balanced, friends. And don't get caught up in this new green religion. Be aware of what's going on. Be aware, friends. We need you. We need you to be aware. We need you to be balanced. And we need you to help expose what's going on. Okay? You don't have to do what I'm doing or other people are doing, but be aware. Go back into the Bible and read those passages and come away from them with a renewed hope for the world to come. Moving on. Be balanced. Avoid false guilt. They're going to use guilt, on you. There will be tremendous pressure put on you to change your lifestyle, to vote for things that you wouldn't ordinarily vote for. There's a tsunami out there, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And pretty soon, every person's going to have to make a decision on it. My advice to you is to avoid green guilt. Why? Because it's false guilt. It's built on a lie. There is no such thing as green guilt. Genuine guilt is when you or I have done something wrong and the Holy Spirit convicts us of a transgression of God's law. This is different. This is built on a desire to control the entire world. This whole climate thing is a catastrophic, nightmarish mess. And I'll expound on that as I close. But God is going to destroy this earth with fire, friends. Not because he's hard-hearted, mean, or whatever, because he wants to make it new. It needs to be purified, and in that way provide the foundation for a better earth. Worship the Creator, dear ones. Don't worship the creation. Stand tall for Jesus. I close with a slide here that I think my wife located for me some years ago. Bless her heart. I thought it was kind of funny. There's a guy and a girl in a car, and they come up to a dead end. She says, I told you to ask for directions. He said, but I thought all roads lead to God. He's on the road of what? Environmentalism. He's on the road of climate fervor, climate change, religion. No, there's only one way to God, and that's through Jesus Christ, and Jesus Christ alone. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes unto the Father but by me. I encourage you to read through Romans chapter 1, read through Revelation 19, read through many of the Psalms, dear ones. And let God comfort your heart in the world to come, and to help you above all to have the Holy Spirit for discernment, because it's starting to get very deceiving for people. And I don't want you to be caught up in that, or your children. So let's bring maximum glory to God. Romans 1:25 says they changed the truth of God into a lie. They worshiped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Now, why is that passage in the book of Romans? Because God is identifying what the end times would look like. He's identifying a tremendous problem in the world. This is a problem that is followed down through the Bible in many, many different ways, as they worshiped under every green tree. Worship the Creator, not the creation. The climate change issue, friends, as I sum up here, is a catastrophic, nightmarish mess. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, it's very difficult to separate science from politics. And secondly, even if the more radical claims were true, I don't believe they are, we have no idea what to do about it. And I don't believe we have the ability to actually alter global climate. The Bible says, seed time and harvest shall continue. You'll find that in the book of Genesis. The seasons will continue until finally the sky unrolls like a scroll, like a blueprint. God shows up. And then it's over. Let's be faithful to him. Let's go about our work with joy. Let's be wise. Let's think honestly, friends. And then let's act. Amen.